Schmeichel, and I am with Smithsonian Gardens. Many of you all have been in this region for a while. You're probably familiar with Smithsonian, maybe heard of it. A lot of people don't realize that we have a team of 60 employees that take care of the gardens surrounding all of the museums downtown and in Anacostia and some other sites in Suitland, Maryland. So what I wanted to focus on today was to talk about the alternatives to all these invasive plants that we hear about and go into a little bit more depth of the why and then offer some alternatives. And hopefully you all have great ideas too. I would ask that if you do have a question or input, just raise your hand. I will have time at the very end to answer any questions. I'll hold off and go into two silos if you have a lot of questions, no problem. So this is my contact info. It's also on the handout that I gave you. So basically the handout goes along with the PowerPoint. For those of you that are online, I will offer the PDF in the after session notes you all can access. So if you show up in person, you get the printouts for free. So with that, why don't we dive right in? Yeah. All right, so again, I said Smithsonian, can we move this?
Yeah, you click that little
minimize
it.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. All right, so Smithsonian Gardens is essentially 14 unique garden spaces, as I said, that surround the Smithsonian museums, and they are an extension of the museums themselves. So each garden surrounding that space is a reflection of the collection that's inside. So I work at the National Museum of Natural History Gardens, so they are native plants, that's natural history. We have urban bird habitat, we have pollinator gardens, and we do a lot of work with native plants, educating people from all over the world. We have something like 17 million people that come to visit us. And we just celebrated our 50th anniversary of being a museum. So we've been around a lot longer than people realize, and we're excited to share what we know with everyone that wants to come and see us. So please come and see us, because we're everywhere. This is actually an older map. The 14th site, the Anacostia Museum, is not here on this map, but you can see we go all the way from the Freer-Sackler Gallery, the Smithsonian Castle, Arts and Industries Building, Air and Space Museum. I know you all have an Air and Space Museum out this way, but we don't have gardens at that one yet. The American Indian Museum, and then across the mall, Natural History is the team that I work with, American History and African American History and Culture. And then up in Chinatown is the Kogod Courtyard and the American Art Museum. So we're not the U.S. Botanic Garden. They're lovely, great neighbors. We're not the Architecture Capital, great neighbors. We're not the Arboretum. So got lots of fabulous places to go visit, and I encourage you all to come down and see all of them. So diving into our subject. So I know that I am preaching to the choir on why invasives are a bad problem, but I want to go into a little bit of the background so that we all are on the same page and understand the process, how I'm describing this. So according to the USDA invasive species, basically an invasive species is a non-native plant animal disease that is entered into the ecosystem, and it results in harm to that ecosystem or to human health. So non-native, harmful, right? So those are the two, very basic concepts that I am discussing here today. And we can talk about the reasons why invasive plants specifically are such a problem, and that's because the characteristics that they have make them grow a lot faster and outcompete our native species and throws everything off balance. So that's the problem. They grow very quickly. Their life cycle completes much more quickly than a lot of our native plants. And their seeds, they usually have a lot of seeding that disperses quickly, which means that it just starts the whole process over and over again. And it spreads with rampant overtaking. So you can see everyone, I think, has seen highways and byways with the kudzu. Have you guys ever had kudzu jelly? I had it once in North Carolina, and I was like, I didn't even know you could do that. It's really good. It's in the pea family. I mean,
size, this plants?
It's just the list, so yes, it doesn't have all the pictures, no. But you'll have the recording, all of these will be recorded, we can look at again, so. This is from let me see if I can move this over so you all can get some of these sources. Zoom. So this is Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. Come on. Let me do it.
Gotta click back into the.
I suppose so. There we go.
That's just.
This is like a billboard of
Yeah.
go away. Okay, so the use of invasive plants comes at a very high cost. This is an old statistic from the Department of Conservation and Recreation, 2005, that the cost of invasive species, which include plants and animals and diseases, was over $120 billion. And that's a over 10-year-old statistic. So I'm sure that it's not gotten much better, if not maybe even larger. And they have long-lasting effects that we have to continue to deal with to keep our spaces, our ecosystems beautiful. So according to the U.S. Forest Service, 42% of U.S. endangered and threatened species, their decline was invasive plants were a contributing factor to their decline. 18% of the plants that were endangered and threatened, their main cause of decline was from invasive species. So that means so nearly half, the direct link to that were these invasive species. And the reason is, as we mentioned before, is that they outcompete our native species. So there's a finite amount of light, water, nutrients, soil, just physical space to grow in. And if these invasive plants are growing faster than our beloved natives, then our natives are really struggling and they just can't compete with that. So it results in a decreased diversity of plant life, which also results in degraded wildlife habitats. And it also can have effects on our recreation areas, soil erosion, or water quality. These are all things I'm sure you all have heard throughout the day. These are not new concepts, and I'm glad that you all are here learning about it so that you can try to promote a positive change, right? So I've heard a lot of these lectures that talk about, oh, here's some invasive plants and then here's some native alternatives. But I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper because working in a public garden industry and working with a lot of professionals in the industry that are also, commercial landscape designers or what I call like the mow and blow crews, I wanted to dive deep into why this is still a problem. We can't necessarily help things that just come in on, on a large scale internationally, but we can make choices about what we purchase and what we put into our landscapes in a mindful way. And so I wanted to figure out, why is it that this keeps happening? Why are people still buying these plants? Like, surely everyone knows now that they're invasive and they're bad. And I think it just comes down to the average homeowner or person who just got into gardening because it's COVID and they can't leave their house, just doesn't know. They don't know that they're invasive plants. They don't understand the harm that they can cause in our ecosystem. They want to keep up with the Joneses. Oh, my neighbor has that Rosa Sharon and I love it and it's beautiful, and I want to show that I'm a good member of my community, so I'm going to mirror that, put that in my yard. Or it comes down to, you go to the big box store, I need 100 plants and I only have a couple $100. What can I get to fill that? You have to get, it's what's available, right? If you go and you see, oh, this is a great price, I'm going to get 5 plants of that, plant it, and then it's taken over your yard. So I wanted to acknowledge that that's a challenge that we face in our communities, HOAs, and also just our neighbors, that a lot of times folks don't know. And so we just want to encourage them by giving them some information. And one of the ways that I find people are more perceptive to making these changes from invasive plants to native plants is to be encouraging and promote incremental positive change and not necessarily, that's what an invasive plant, why do you wish I knew that? People are not, people are very resistant to that, right? So I think the best way is to just be encouraging, to offer information and help if they need it, and to showcase how beautiful our native plants can be in our own yards and communities. And so that's why you guys are here. You're already doing a lot of great work. So this kind of cut off a little bit, but basically, I talked to a lot of gardeners who, or maybe they're new homeowners, they're sort of overwhelmed by where to start. They're like, oh no, I know that there's all this stuff. I just bought a house. I don't know what's in the backyard. I don't know what anything is. I don't know what I should keep. And so I kind of break it down into a hierarchy of steps so that it's a little bit more bite-sized, and not so overwhelming. And so the number one thing that I hope folks take away today is identify what's an invasive plant and remove it from your space. And there's a lot of really great invasive plant resources on the very back of your handout. So I'm not going to list all of them. I'll mention a few as we go, but that identifying and being aware that it's an invasive plant is the first step. When I was researching this, I found a number of species I didn't realize were invasive. And so now they're on my list to remove from the garden at work. So remove those invasive species. If there are some non-native plants that are not problematic, that you just love, like if you just love that rose bush that your great grandmother grew and you put cuttings and it makes you happy, absolutely include it in your landscape and your garden, because humans are we're part of the landscape too. So, it's important that we have gardens that make us feel good. Also start adding more native plants, even if it's just one or two at a time. Maybe you get a couple milkweed plants from your neighbor, or you go to a native plant sale and you say, I've got $50 and what can I get with that? And you just start, and then you divide, you share with your friends, and it kind of grows more and more and more. So also an important component of this is how we manage our spaces. So reducing the use of pesticides and herbicides is going to be really helpful to our wildlife who use that space. And in the wintertime, everyone's like, oh, clean up everything. I want to have my yard be nice and tidy. But we still have sticks and stalks and stems up in the garden on the National Mall. And we have a sign that says, we did this on purpose. We're not, we're not just lazy. We'll get to it when the time is right. Because a lot of our pollinators will use those plant parts as overwintering sites. And a lot of the wildlife will use the seeds for food sources. So that's sort of my hierarchies as I'm going through a space, like where do I need to start and progress through and encourage folks to make a difference. So as I mentioned before, there are thankfully a lot of really great resources specific to our region that I cross-referenced. So this is one that I found recently, the Plant Invaders of the Mid-Atlantic Natural Areas. Super great, very extensive. Some of them I had never even heard of before. And I also cross-referenced with the Virginia.gov website and the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. So hundreds and hundreds of plants. We don't have time to go through all of them. So I focused on where do these plants overlap on these lists, and what plants can you still find at a garden center and potentially buy. So I focused on that, and then I grouped them by the function that they play within a landscape. So it's a slightly different take on it, but I think when we go through, it'll make a little bit more sense. You guys with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to start with the biggest species and work our way down. So starting with our trees, the Norway maple. Oh, isn't it beautiful? It's got lovely fall color. You know what else does? Black gum.
Yeah, and
It's so beautiful and glossy and well behaved. I mean, How lovely is this red
Toxic to
maple?
horses, not black gum, it's your red maples are toxic.
Well, don't feed your horse. But you know, we have a lot of native plants that folks just maybe just don't think about. We take for granted that our natural beauty is all around us. Also, people love their flowering trees, and I get it. Like Paulownia, oh my goodness. I just, my folks have like 5 acres in a wooded lot, and things just appear, and when I go to visit, I'm like, what's that? Oh, isn't it beautiful? I'm like, yeah, but mom. We have a lot of beautiful native flowering trees too. Our tulip trees, we have our lovely magnolias, the catalpa, which is just fun to say. The catalpa biganoides. I mean, when you just want to get it because of the name.
Yes.
The esculus, our buckeyes, so beautiful. Lots of different native magnolias. I mean, we know about the southern magnolia, that's pretty common. But we also have some really lovely deciduous ones, the Virginiana. We have big leaf magnolia, lots of lovely things. Just maybe think outside the box. And how many of you all have seen these everywhere? Here. And you think, yeah, the thugs, flowering trees. I mean, and we get it, like we understand, like a whole row of these when they're blooming for a week or so and it's raining, the petals. And then you go somewhere in the woods and you see this and you're like, those weren't planted, they came in on their own. This is a problem. My professor used to say, when I was in horticulture school, he would say, the best way to prune Bradford pears is just cut it off at the ground.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. So we have a lot of really lovely native small trees, and I talk to a lot of folks who live in small, townhouses or urban environments, working in DC. And so these are some great trees that you can have in a small lot. I've even seen some people put them in containers where they can dig in the soil, or they were renting and they didn't want to plant a tree and they wanted to be able to take it with them. Your amelanchier, your serviceberry or Juneberry, has beautiful flowers, and then the little fruits that come in June, that are completely edible. I had a coworker who collected a bunch and made like a Juneberry crisp, which was really lovely, and brought it in. So great. Our dogwoods, the Cyananthus Virginiana fringe tree just looks like white puffy clouds, and our red buds. And there's even, depending on where you stand on straight species and nativars, there's a whole other day, a whole other lecture. If you're open to some of these different nativars, they have some different forms and stuff. If you want them more columnar or weeping, they're doing a lot of interesting plant breeding, and I'm curious to see how they perform. This one, everyone's like, but that bird love it. I'm like, yeah, and then the birds poop it out everywhere else. The white mulberry. We do have a native mulberry, but it's kind of a native thug, which I'll talk a little bit about the native thugs. Like, just because you plant it and it's native, maybe not necessarily the best basin sometimes, but some other lovely fruits again are our serviceberries or persimmons and pawpaws. I was in one of the lectures earlier today when they were talking about persimmons, and she was like, I don't like persimmons, and you can't really reach them. And I would agree that I'm not a big fan of them either. You have to wait till after that frost where they sweeten. And if you wait long enough or you shake on the tree hard enough, they'll come to the ground. But the wildlife love it. Again, our pawpaws, really fun trees. All right, now we get into this sort of evergreen shrubs. So a lot of people, I see this a lot in my neighborhood where the houses were built in the 50s. I see a lot of this like privet hedge. I didn't know what it was for a while. Like, what is this weird stuff? I've never seen. So privet, some people purchase it. Sometimes I think it just comes in on its own. Elaeagnus, the thorny olive, or as I call it, ugly Agnes, very prolific. And one that I more recently found out about was this Mahonia. That's a pretty common one. I feel like every month it just spread. You'll see it in native spaces where it wasn't planted. So fortunately, we have Berberis aquifolium, which is native and almost looks identical to the other one. And then we have, we have a lot of great native ilex. Some are deciduous, some are evergreen. There's an extent, I wasn't enough room on the screen to put all of them, but there's definitely several. And again, if you're interested in smaller cultivars, they have identified some that are becoming more available in the trade for smaller spaces. Also, the Miraca amarella, the bayberry, it's where the bayberry candle comes from. And our Eastern red cedar, they've got different forms of that now too. This is actually one we have on campus called gray owl, and it only gets about this tall, and it's a more spreading form. So if you only have a small space, that's a great alternative to privet. And this is where we start to get into those plants. You're like, oh, I remember my grandmother had the Rose of Sharon, and I remember the spirea, and oh, the butterfly bush must be good for butterflies, right? This is kind of embarrassing how old I was before I realized that honeysuckle was not native, because as a kid I just grew up pulling the honeysuckles apart and eating the nectar, right?
And we're older.
So I was much older than I'd like to admit before I realized that.
Well, then why do the butterflies swarm the butterfly bushes?
My understanding, if I'm not an entomologist, my understanding is that it's not a high quality food source, so they love it. So it's like, we love getting fried chicken at KFC or Chick-fil-A, but it's not really good for us, but we love it. So that's my understanding in a nutshell. It's like butterfly crack. I don't know. So we have a lot of really great alternatives. I just listed a few. There are many more. Our Calethra, summer sweet Calethra. Again, our Aesculus, our horse chestnuts, our lovely sweet little mountain laurels, which we can't grow down in the city because they're too sensitive to the urban 9th Street tunnel gas. Our Iteas, we have lots of several different hydrangeas that are native, the arborescens and the quercifolia, the oak leaf hydrangeas, which is, I could swoon for an oak leaf hydrangea. And then we have a lot of really lovely rhododendrons. This is a flame. It's not a great picture, but it does really highlight that bright orange that will just glow in a woodland setting. So I put these in a category all by themselves. And so this was, when I was going to school, these were still good to use and everybody would recommend them. We've since learned that they do spread in their native areas, so we need to be aware of that. And unfortunately, I mean, I love viburnums, so that's kind of a bummer, but especially the plicatum, those species tend to be more problems. So this is an example of I'd like to point out that just because I'm a professional and the folks I work with, we do our best to not have invasive plants. We make mistakes too. We can't know everything. And as you learn more, you know better and you do better, right? So it's just a progress, not perfection mindset. So we identified these and I thought, oh, well, those have got to come out. I better find something else really cool to replace it with. So we're constantly amending and working as new information becomes available. We have a lot of great viburnums that are native. Our maple leaf viburnum, arrowwood. This is a particularly lovely one, the viburnum nudum. Lots of fruits that the birds can utilize. And they all have different shapes and forms depending on what you want in your landscape. Oh, so your fall color winter interest shrubs. I think we all know about Nandina. I have been fighting. My husband and I bought our first house a couple years ago. There's this one Nandina, and I have been fighting this thing for 3 years because it's planted right up against the house where the electric lines come in, so I can't dig it safely. So I've just been like cutting off the berries and cutting it back and treating it, and it comes back just angrier. So, you know, we all struggle with it. Our Japanese barberry, I mean, yeah, it's a nice color, but they're thorny too. I was camping once with some friends, and we were hiking around, and we looked out and we saw this beautiful display of like red foliage. And I thought, oh, that's so beautiful. What is it? And I came up closer, and it was this. And that was not too far from Shenandoah National Park. And I thought, no. So, you know, I've seen firsthand what it can do when it gets out of control. So again, these are some others that we've already talked about. The Iteas, you know, they have beautiful fall foliage. Now they're deciduous, so they'll lose their leaves. But those oak leaf hydrangeas, those flower heads, they'll keep their structure through the winter, and the snow and ice fall on them. And they're really architectural. Same thing with our Fothergillas. We have a couple different ones. They have beautiful fall color, white bottle brush flowers in the springtime, sort of gray green foliage. Oh boy. Yeah. So before I worked at Smithsonian, I worked at the American Horticultural Society in Alexandria, and it used to be the property used to be a private estate, and we had the biggest patch of invasive bamboo. I mean, you just could not control it, short of, you know, napalm or something. I don't know, but we were right near the river, so we were really limited, and all we could do was just sort of keep it in it was all we could do to just keep it where it was. And I was talking to a neighbor who had grown up in the neighborhood, and she said, oh yeah, everyone used to plant them on the property lines to mark the property lines. And I thought, well, that's why it's everywhere, because, you know, 70 years ago, if everybody's doing that on purpose. So moral of the story, don't plant bamboo.
There are clumping.
There are clumping ones. There is one native one, but I've had such a bad experience. I wouldn't even try. I just, even the native one.
County just passed a law about bamboo.
Thank goodness.
They sold the property also,
Who did?
where the place where you used to work.
River Farm?
Oh, that's cool. That's a whole, I know what you're talking about. That's a whole hot mess. Hold on, we're doing screens. So that's one of the main reasons that people plant this, is because they want it to function as a screen, a visual barrier, and privacy fences are expensive. So if we can do it with plants, and then I'm all for it. So move this so you can see all the different cultivars and stuff. So our eastern white pines, there are so many cultivars. If you're interested in that, 4 straight species are always best if you're doing native plants for ecosystem services. But if you have to get rid of invasives and you're not quite ready to take the natural form approach to your landscape, these are a great sort of mid-ground of native plants without causing a lot of harm. So our magnolias, our Thuya occidentalis, our juniper and eastern red cedars, and again, the Myrica and Morella, depending on where you are in the binomial nomenclature, they're used interchangeably a lot. And this picture made me laugh. It's not a great picture of the Myrica, because it looks like either the person pruning it was only about as tall as me and they couldn't reach, or that's as high as the deer could get, or something. But that made me laugh away. There's a reason I work with plants and not computers. Okay. So this is Lespedeza. There are a couple different ones, and they're big, bushy, prolifically flowering, herbaceous, shrubby things. I don't even know how you would categorize it. But people love it because they're like, I can buy one thing and it'll take up this whole spot and it'll flower, and I love it. So what are some other alternatives? Joe Pye weed. I mean, that stuff can get 8 feet tall sometimes. It's huge. I've just seen them covered with like 50 swallowtail butterflies in the fall. Also, our ironweed, that's hard to say, Vernonia novaborescens, ironweed. Yeah. And this is the newer one that I recently found out about that we're experimenting with, Baccharis palamifolia. I had not worked with it, but I was looking at a public garden that had a native plant display in the fall, and there's a big cloud of white blooms, and it just looked like it was vibrating from every manner of pollinator that was utilizing it. And I thought, wow, if you have one, it's like a shrub, it's huge, but it gets like
Like a tree.
10 feet tall, but bushy. So we got one to plant, and I hope it doesn't take over like size wise. And I think we also got it because it kind of sounds like a Harry Potter spell, like Baccharis. This is another one that, from my understanding, I don't work with a lot of waterways, but the lithorum, it just sort of weaves its way through these wetland areas that are a little bit more sensitive, and they spread through the waterways very easily, and that's why they take over. People think, oh, it's so beautiful, and it's just a sea of purple. Well, we got a lot of purple native plants too that are really great. Our phloxes, our asters, or symbiotrichums, depending on how they're classified. A lot of our liatris, there's probably like a dozen liatris that are native to the whole United States, that come in different forms, from the microcephala, which is the teeny tiny, to the ligulostylus, which is taller than me, which isn't saying a lot, but taller than me. And our obedient plant, which if you want something to take over and be native, you have a big space to fill. Yeah. I mean, I have not personally had that experience, but I know that it's an issue, so I always put that caveat in. It also comes in a white form, but they're fun when we have young kids come in, because I tell them why it's called obedient plant, because you can move the individual flowers and they'll stay, and they think that's the coolest thing ever. So, all right, now we go into the vines. How are we on time? Okay, we're good. All right, so there are a lot. And this is certainly not exhaustive, and I did not include plants that you tend to not see at the store sold. So I didn't include bittersweet, I didn't include porcelain berry vine, and things like that. I just focused on things that people keep buying and keep bringing in. So the wisteria, I just think we'll have it forever, right? We do have some native wisterias that are, not as prolific, but that's a good thing. The sweet autumn clematis. A lot of people don't realize that that's invasive, and it does take over a lot. And it's hard to differentiate between some of the native ones or some of the non-invasive ones. So if you're not sure and it's growing suspiciously well, it's probably better to take it out. Of course, the honeysuckle, we've sort of already touched on that. Some of them grow in more of a shrubby form and some more of a vining form, so I put them in both places. And Akebia, which is one that I learned a little bit more recently, the Akebia quinata. And as we're, what I'm noticing is that because, I live in Virginia, but when I garden in DC, it's a little bit warmer. So we have this microclimate of being in a city, just all the hardscaping and heat island effect. And a lot of our garden space, like the garden behind Smithsonian Castle, is actually a green roof. So it gets heat from the museum underneath. So we're almost a zone 8 in some places. And there's little pockets where we have things that are zone 9 that overwinter by the sculpture garden. So when I talk to folks and talk about like climate change and like, oh, it's okay, that plant will die in the winter, we don't have to worry about it. Well, that might be changing. And so things that might have not been a problem for us before, but for problems for folks a little farther south may become our problem. So it's just good to be mindful of what we're introducing to those spaces. So lots of really lovely vines. Some are very prolific growers. If you plant a trumpet creeper, you better be real sure you want it and have a really good sturdy support of something, because it will take over and it will be fabulous. You'll have hummingbirds for days, but that's one that if you're not sure if you have enough space, maybe don't get that one. But the trumpet honeysuckle, that was one of the best ones that performs even in the city. Like, it's just sort of thrives on neglect. We do have our native clematis that looks just like the sweet autumn clematis, the Virginiana. They have several others that have different forms. The bignonia, the crossvine, the Carolina jessamine, and then our native wisterias, which are much more manageable. Onto the grasses. This is one that's kind of tricky because we finally gotten to the point where we encourage people that understand grasses are beautiful. And so like, yeah, grasses are beautiful. And then they find out that half the ones they like, they shouldn't be like them, right? So the blood grass, I feel like we've known about that for a while. But the fountain grass is a newer one that has gone on the no list for garden. Of course, we've known about maidenhair for a while, the miscanthus, and the pampas grass. That's another one that, it's from South America. And, when I was reading, I was like, should I put it in? Should I not put it in? But definitely farther south than us, it's an invasive problem. And if we're having that, climate change and these milder winters, let's just not include it in the mix. Let's just do something else. We've got a lot of great grasses. I only mentioned a few. Our switchgrass, little blue stem, Indian grass. Some of them can get very, very big, and some of them are more manageable at knee height. So, yeah. So, I just mentioned a few, but there are a lot of really great ones depending on what you're looking for. Oh, this stuff. Or as one of my friends called it, liriope. Is it? Well, liriope, yeah. I'm from Tennessee, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
This was like the standard landscape plant when I first started learning about, like, everybody had it, mondo grass, all that stuff. And it's so sturdy, and it keeps its color all year long. And we have it growing in the turf. I was like, we don't have any of this for blocks around. I don't know where it must be coming in from the birds, or from the mowers. That's the other thing, that if they're mowing other properties and they're mowing over people's liriope, and then they bring the same mower to your site, and all the stuff is on the, yeah. So anyways, we've been fighting it. We dig it, and we think we get it, and the next year, and they're so infuriating. But Carex, I'm so excited. You're a real big plant nerd when you get excited about Carex, but they have done so much to market and really encourage people to love Carex as it's a sedge, but it looks like a grass, and it comes in every, form and shape and color of green that you want. And there's a lot of really great native ones, and they're becoming more readily available in common spaces. So just a couple that, like, look at that. Like this Vulpinoides and this Carex stricta. Who needs fountain grass if you've got that? And some of these cute little guys. So there's hundreds and hundreds. And I meant to mention, the Mount Cuba Center, are you all familiar with that institution? So every couple of years, they pick out a genus of plants that they want to study. And then they study it for 2 or 3 years, and then they put out these reports. on how they perform for their aesthetic landscape value, disease resistance, and ecosystem services for wildlife. And they just published the CareX one. And the whole office was up just so excited. Wow, we got to get out more. The pandemic's been a lot. So this is, I think this is sort of where most people become the most familiar with these invasive bugs or the ground covers. So, you know, a lot of these, I'm sure you're very familiar with the English ivy, the creeping euonymus, your vincas. This is one that that I found out about more recently because it's commonly used as an annual in containers.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, it's an annual, you know, it's fine. I was like, wow, it must have had a mild winter. It overwintered. Oh, wow, it grew a lot. Then I looked it up and nope, that's an invasive species. Sylvia, you need to not do that anymore. So, like I said, we all make mistakes. And then the Japanese spurge, which is a really common ones. I don't know if you all have this experience, but there are certain garden centers that we all go to from time to time, and they have the ground covers together. And I just call it like the wall of invasives, and there's just like carts of it, and you're just thinking like, oh my gosh,
I'm gonna be pulling it out.
who's gonna have to pull it out because it's gonna be a problem. So lots of native alternatives to ground covers. They're not always as traditionally vining as we think of as ground covers, but I think if we reconsider what we you know, the function of a ground cover is you want it to be covered so you're not weeding all the time, and you don't have to buy as much mulch, right? So just something that's going to be sort of a blanket on the ground and not be too tall, and maybe help with some soil stabilization. So all of these do that function, and having a mix of a lot of these, and I didn't put all of them down, but your Virginia creeper, beautiful color. Yeah, I mean it can be aggressive, and I mean it's definitely, just because a plant is native, if it's aggressive and it's
plant it.
No, do plant it. Butterflies, it's species specific.
Yeah. So
How tall is the sunflower again?
it's cute. Yeah, it's cute. And there's some that are more like a running variety, and some that are a little bit more clumping. So the tiarella, I mean the tiarellas, the heucheras, I love heucheras, but sometimes they can be a little, I don't know, short-lived, or you know, some of our native ones, but our native ones don't have as big a flower as the tiarella. So those are great. If you have a wet spot, the green and gold, chrysogonum, the Pachyra aria. So that's what the flower looks like. It's about this tall. And then after they flower and go to seed, I leave them for a little while, and then I just cut them flush with the rosette, and I just leave the debris on the ground. And so if you don't have the unsightliness, if you will, in the spring of the sticks, but they're still physically there. So if any of the wildlife need to utilize it, it's still in the vicinity, just down instead of not up. All right, and then I added bulbs because this is one that I think we don't realize, and it's not a real plant, or it's not a permanent plant, but they've really become a problem. So these Spanish bluebells, I mean they're lovely.
Yes.
They are. Excuse me, the lily of the valley. I mean, I know I grew up with them. My grandmother loved them. The ornithogalum. Ugh. So the garden that I take care of is like 25, 30 years old. And it used to just be like a generic, you know, 80s style garden. You know, it's like pictures of women with like Aquanet hair and shoulder pads and this stuff. But the ornithogalum, like I can't get rid of it. Like I dig it up. I've even tried different chemicals on it. So it's like, well, I guess I'm just going to keep digging until I just exhaust the soil bank. The Arometallicum, this one a lot of people don't realize is a thug, but it is. And the Leucojum, that's a new one that I found out about. So that's on my takeout list too. 10 minutes? Good. That's good. Yeah. So native arts alternatives. So the others were bulbs. I would encourage folks to consider the ephemerals because they act a lot like bulbs, meaning they come up typically in early spring when the leaves are down from the tree, so they're getting that filtered sunlight, and then as soon as things start to warm up, they're done blooming and they finish their show and kind of, I don't want to say they die down to the ground, but the leaves and the flower stalks sort of, I don't know, go to sleep. They just sort of disappear, and then you're like, where did the bloodroot go? And then there it is the next year. So they're really quite charming. I mean, the Virginia bluebells, a blue flower in nature, that's pretty unusual in this part of the world. Your little jack in the pulpits. So a lot of great alternatives. And so these are all of the main references that I utilize, and they're all on your sheet, so you don't have to scribble quickly. I think the Audubon site is really good, as is the National Wildlife Federation. You can type in your exact location and it'll populate a list for you. If you're just like, I don't know where to start or what anything's called. But I feel like you all probably have a pretty good basis for your research. So this is me. You are welcome to contact me. My email's on there. I also encourage you all to follow Smithsonian Gardens because not only do we have our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we have on our website a list of, we have our newsletter that you can subscribe to, and then we have an ongoing virtual lecture series called Let's Talk Gardens that started during the pandemic, and now we finally figured out how to do it well. And so there is a library, a digital library that's free for anyone to access of all of our talks, and it has everything imaginable from houseplants and orchids to native plants to vegetable gardens, and it's there, and it just lives there happily for anyone to enjoy. And I've done a couple other talks as well. So that is not native, but I like the picture. It matched my pants.
Yeah.
So it's celosia, which is well, it's, I mean, I planted as an annual, and then at the end of the season we dig it up and take it away. So, and it goes in the compost. So that's what I'm talking about when it's a non-native, but it doesn't cause harm and it makes you happy. It's all about balance, right? So, and then we had any questions from our 15 folks at home?
Someone asked about blue mist flower.
Yes, it's great.
What about it? That's great. Okay.
It's great. Do it.
Southern magnolia, they did not think was native to Virginia.
So yes, so that's another whole topic of conversation. If you want to be super hyper local to if you're doing restoration and hyper local, you can look for the local ecotypes that are offered in your county. You know, you can really go down a rabbit hole depending on how enthusiastic you want to be for native plants. As a horticulturist that got into this for beautiful plants and loving all plants, it's hard for me to just do only natives. But if that's of concern to you, certainly look for the plants that are to your specific area if you want to keep with those plant communities.
Southern magnolia invasive.
She said it was not, she didn't think it was native to this part of Virginia.
Okay, but it's not invasive.
Correct.
So don't care. It is. Yeah, they're so beautiful.
All right, any questions from you all?
Yeah, another question.
Yes.
What about myrtles?
About what?
Yeah, myrtles.
Myrtles?
Myrtles, because they are not native
Mm-hmm.
from America, but they have been for so long that they might actually better to actually be able
To utilize them?
Utilize them, but you know, they seem to me everywhere.
Mhm.
nowadays.
Which myrtle? Like the crepe myrtles? So
I actually found out that they were, I thought that they were sheltered.
right. They have been here for a long time. I would categorize them in they're non-native, and if you take care of them and don't what?
Okay.
They're okayish, yeah. They're actually the crepe bark beetle scale, or beetle scale, is one of the pests that they're, farther south, they're really battling with. And it's just covered in sooty mold and they're just turning black. And we started seeing some of that in DC. So our arborist on staff was actually saying, you know, everyone should start to look for alternatives in case we need to take these crepe myrtles out. So, just,
That's really good.
so, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say cut them all down, but maybe don't add any more. Yes, ma'am. Oh,
Yeah, they will send up shoots.
yeah, their wood is incredibly hard. Yeah, and rot resistant. I mean, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
They are. Anyone else? Please, yeah. Any other questions? I have any more questions?
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. You're staying awake all day. Thanks for coming out.